I could have made the movie very true to the original, but that's not my style.
The more time passes, the more Satoshi Kon's eclectic style has made him a legend within the industry, but there's one problem looming over his career. A directorial career he didn't even plan to have. Kon grew up in post-war northern Japan, bug-catching and watching cartoons like most children his age. As a child, I loved animation, all of it, whether it was Japanese or whether it came from overseas. If it was a moving image, then it made me very happy. He loved Space Battleship Yamato so much he confessed to his classmates his goal of becoming an animator. They proceeded to mock him. By high school, Kon had become something of an oddball compared to his peers. Tall, long-haired, brighter than most, preferring the company of the girls. After all, they were much more complicated and mature than the boys. Yet this didn't stop him from joining the art and manga clubs, where he got entangled into the early otaku culture. My seniors got me into Gundam. We used to watch it enthusiastically, saying, "This is so cool!" Although the manga of his youth is where his true enthusiasm lied, shoujo stories in particular, not a huge surprise when you consider his... yeah. Yet one specific mangaka left the biggest impact on Kon. The comic new wave led a rise of manga stories for older readers, and drawing was one of the few things Kon never tired of. Even if he didn't want to be a mangaka at the time, he did apply to the 10th annual Tetsuya Chiba Awards, placing second. With Kon's go-with-the-flow mentality, his future was set. I thought being a manga artist seemed okay. He went off to work for Young Magazine, who just so happened to be publishing this little indie story most people hadn't heard of at the time. In fact, Otomo and Kon became acquainted after he won his award. Then, suddenly, they were colleagues. Kon assisted on the Akira manga while he was writing his own, the influence of which were blunt and unrefined. These were his formative years, after all. And after 6 of those, he got his first big break with a long-form manga called Tropics of Cancer, one of the few Kon stories not to be set in Tokyo, but in a far-off seaside town. Starting with the very realistic and gradually turns into a fantasy towards the climax, with a splash of gentrification. Tropics is a mellow, pretty thing. I don't know if it would have been remembered the same way without Kon's name on it, but at the same time, without Kon this series wouldn't have been finished. 3 months to draw 200 pages with a meager amount of prep time. The only leeway they had was swallowed by the 3rd issue. I didn't have time to leave my apartment, 2 days to come up with the storyboard, 3 days to do the rough sketching, and another 2 to ink. Young Magazine is published weekly, rinse and repeat. Kon did an overwhelming amount on his own with minimal assistance. As he said, I'd ruin it by my own hand. My sole source of pleasure was the nightcap I'd have before getting the little sleep I could. This living hell is reality for many mangaka. Kon was still green and not prepared. All things considered, it could have been a lot worse. The version we read today is a revised version from his paperback volume, where he went back in and cleaned it up, adding where he could. The aftermath wouldn't be forgotten though. Extreme fatigue seized me out of the blue. My body felt so heavy I could barely stay seated. On the train home, when I finally reached my apartment and took my temperature, the mercury rose past the 104 mark. I laid in bed groaning for half a month. After that, I was hospitalized. Hepatitis A, such an impressive sounding illness. By the time I was hospitalized, I wasn't pale, I was dyed thoroughly yellow. Jaundice. All the workload and excessive drinking had left Kon in hospital for another month. And during an excessive drinking session, Otomo and Kon came up with the idea for their next project.
兄貴から連絡がないか。
これが普通のジャパニーズなら立ち退き料の200-300万も積むところだが。
Putting together the original story for Otomo's first live-action feature, by 1990 Otomo had quite the best-selling reputation as an artist and even as a filmmaker. Together with screenwriter Nobumoto, they created world apartment horror. It may be a haunted house, but the true focus is on the racism and the class struggle of the immigrant community within Japan. Albeit Kon wasn't happy with this story and ended up adapting the movie into his own manga. It suits the medium better, where the limits of budget and production are no longer constraints, bringing its bombastic breakneck pace while shredding its runtime. Thanks to Mr. Otomo's help, I was able to begin working in the anime industry. However, Kon wasn't finished with manga yet. After Animage finished publishing Nausicaa, a slot needed to be filled. Two creators stepped forward, one with ties to the management, and another with experience in the manga industry. Oshii and Kon's cult status and burgeoning style seemed like a match made in heaven, but collabs tend to sour over time. At first glance, STEVEM reads as if a checklist for Oshii's preferences, although if you listen to the editor of the time, he stands by it being a collaborative experience from right at the beginning. As Kon became more involved into the story process, he became more assertive, and that took its toll, with the dispute over who gets credit for what. In his own words, it left a bitter aftertaste. Going forward, I began to pay attention to the compatibility of my work partners. Everything's an experience. The manga went on to permanent hiatus. The full drama may never be known, but each creator did go on to better and bigger things. Like Kon's seminal manga, Opus. His first big jump into metafiction, he dabbled in it before with a couple of his shorts, yet this, peer into the life of a mangaka and the experience of making such a hectic living off comic books. It was certainly inspired by the prolific sci-fi author Yasutaka Tsutsui, who changed how Kon would construct his narratives. What is fiction? What is reality? It's the mix of extreme imagery next to levity, and the birth of his dedication to the female protagonist. I learned some basic ideas that were critical for later on when I became an animator, like how to create storylines, developing characters, and designing backgrounds. Yet it would all fall apart again by the end of June, as Opus was cancelled before completion by its own magazine, Goken Bi-Monthly.
I'm working on a final chapter. It'll be an abrupt ending, but it's better than nothing. Well, there's about 350 pages finished. What? At least it could be a graphic novel. I'm serious. STEVEM? My bastard child. Yeah, that's not finished either. With Opus, though, I have a tentative plan. Everything comes crashing together with the manga and the real world. We don't know what's real anymore than the child and... yeah, similar to Memories. I liked that.
海外のマーケットっていうことももうすでに企画の段階からありましたんでね、かなりそういう意味で言うと、グレードの高い映像を作りたいということはありましたけどね。それは
I wrote a script for another director, Morimoto, an episode of an omnibus film, Memories, called Magnetic Rose. It was also a story of confusion between memories and the real world. Kon would work with the director to build both the set design and the story.
なんか足らないなっていうこう思ってて、でそれはまあその脚本やってもらったコンさんとも話しながらなんか違うよねって言いながら、だから4区あたりで大きく変わったんですよね、ガラッと。
Don't mistake this future setting for something sci-fi. This is a ghost story, a baroque sea shanty orchestrated with an operatic tone, cut into pieces for its audience to feed on slowly, but never revealing its full hand. All leading on a theme that was dear to Kon's heart: reality versus fantasy, a plea against escapism.
思い出は逃げ込む場所じゃない。
It's framed through two different characters that watch Ava go through her own Puccini tale of tragedy and horror. Yoko Kanno composed the soundtrack to bring the opera alive. She was given a creative control to make the best choices for the artistry, and really it is such a verbose film in terms of style. is perhaps some of the height of traditional animation.
ポンさんとも言ってたんだけど、実は俺たちっていうか、だから2人とももうお父さんとずっとこう一緒に仕事をさせてもらってて、いかにそのオトム勝弘という磁場から脱出するかっていうような話だなっていうのをよく2人で話してて、それができないとこれは成功じゃない。
Many consider it the best of the three shorts, perhaps the furthest in style from Otomo's classic nature. Even though it was based on his own work, the creators were adamant of pushing their own path. But at that point, I wasn't sure how to place and blend reality and dreams, so my technique and workmanship was simple. Because I didn't direct it myself, I was a bit concerned about how it was turning out. On many occasions, I thought I would have done things differently. I got my chance to realise those thoughts with Perfect Blue.
Perfect Blue started out as a live-action serial, but after the Kobe earthquake damaged the production house, they switched it to an animated OVA. Otomo had connections with the author. He read the script and recommended Kon, who accepted. Suddenly, the production morphed into a feature, cutting the runtime. Hundreds of scenes thrown away as Blue became bolder in its distortion of reality.
Five seconds. 4, 3, 2.
そんな見ててわからないっていうことはないんじゃないかなっていう気はしたんですけど、まあもうちょっとね、最初のそのシナリオだったり、最初に考えたコンテではもっとなんか説明的なっていうのは分かりやすく見せなきゃと思ってたところがあったんですけど、まあいろいろ諸般の事情で、当初予定したものをなくす。
The Chinese box construction of the play within a play was completed in a scripting phase with screenwriter Sadayuki Murai. They were given 3 key words: idol, fan, and horror. Outside that, it was complete creative control. The reaction? Well, if Alfred Hitchcock partnered with Walt Disney, they'd make a picture like this. Roger Corman. Psycho and Perfect Blue share a few concepts, from the stalker misdirect to the levels of suspense, and for sure Kon took much of his influence from Hollywood. After university, he stopped reading manga, although his inspirations came from a distinct place.
That he offered me access to his harem. One day, the Sultan brought me a bottle of his favorite Tokay.
Terry Gilliam. His depictions are quite bitter. His narration also throws curveballs, and rather than conveying every point in detail, he takes the staging off to a completely different point and plucks out a single, vivid theme. With Perfect Blue, that's self-identity. 2 fish swimming in a bowl, an actress and an idol. Despite the popular perception, the movie wasn't a critique of the idol industry. Kon wasn't as familiar with it as his co-writer, whose prior position handled a lot of idol events. To reveal the behind-the-scenes secrets about the entertainment world was never my intention. I simply wanted to show the process of a young girl maturing, becoming confused, because her old set of values gets shattered. That fundamental struggle 20 years later seems universal in a way neither writer could have predicted with the rise of internet fame, where anyone can become a one-time celebrity and feel the flames of internet stalking, doxing, and abuse.
How do you feel it is now, watching it for the first time in today's climate?
It's really creepy being like an online personality watching a story about how an online personality is.
And that's what's scary about it, right? Is that the themes in that are just as prevalent today as it was back then. If not worse, I feel.
I feel like it's more relevant today.
It was Murai who came up with the idea of the internet. The homepage, Mina's room, another screen in the room, which in itself is a screen. But the homepage is pivotal for the introduction of Mima's doppelganger.
Is that really the job that you wanted? It's a pit.
A persona created from virtual thoughts. The whole process inspired Kon to start his own website as a form of expression, although its parasocial gaze became too much even for Kon, making him stay away for long periods. Perfect Blue is the worst case scenario where everything spirals out of control, like a living nightmare. These are Kon's harshest images, perhaps coming from an OVA background. I went too far, really. When I see it again on the big cinema screen, then I have to lower my head.
Susan Napier has discussed how the film tackles its sadomasochistic sequences. Unlike Hitchcock, it isn't quite male gaze, it's pulled back at times, uncomfortably intimate at others, breaking that immersion as Mima becomes the object of gaze, commodified gently to not cause trouble to anyone. The way we experience it all is through Mima's personal mental state, and it's unhinging. While Kon regrets how strong the images became, he's never shied away from that. If the story, or the characters, or the expression of a mental state requires a violent expression, then I wouldn't hesitate to use it. The strikingness of Perfect Blue played into its favour with a fair amount of international attention, for the time, leading to critical acclaim and slews of interviews with the same three questions. Do you want to make live-action films? Do you want to make live-action films? Where does the title come from? But also, have you considered making live-action films? I have no desire to make live-action films. Your colleagues Mamoru Oshii and Hideaki Anno have made live-action films. I have no desire to make live-action films. Kon's attitude did go against the anime mainstream. He considered much of that landscape to be extremely samey, though he admits to be more of a film buff and not as familiar with the modern anime landscape at the time. The life of a director is a busy one after all. Because of the grounded setting of Perfect Blue, some asked if it would work better as live action. Short answer, no. But Katsuhiro Otomo's response elaborates a little. How would it have been different if it were filmed live? It wouldn't have been so interesting. I don't know if it would have looked exactly the same if Kon were to have filmed the script live. I think it works best as animation. The abstraction of reality is a lot easier to warp when you have control of every frame from the swipe of your brush. Yet it isn't impossible to recreate it on film.
ダーレン・アロノフスキーっていう監督が撮ったんですよ。で、この2カットまんまアングルも構図も同じで、
上からのと、この水の中の、
レクイエム・フォー・ドリームに、使われているんですけど、本人に会って確認したらオマージュだって。オマージュですよ。私に、この私に。
Aronofsky's movies have several homages to Kon. However, it is a myth he ever bought the film rights of Perfect Blue. They first met after the release of Requiem of a Dream, and while Aronofsky was interested in the film rights to make his own live-action versions, Maruyama, the producer, said they never came to an agreement. Masao Moriyama followed Kon throughout his whole film career, and continued to let him make his idiosyncratic movies. Despite the small budgets and frame counts, they left an impact, especially Perfect Blue. Perfect Blue was my first film, and many things didn't look right. There are many elements from it that connect to my later works, and when I watch it again, I feel inspired to keep improving my current work, as if my life depends on the outcome.
But when it came to the follow-up Millennium Actress, it was Taro Maki who inspired the idea, a movie that resembles a stereogram or an optical illusion. The first inkling of an idea was a sentence. Once upon a time, an old actress talks about her life, but her memory is scrambled, mixed with various roles she'd acted in, and together this creates a dramatic story. Screenplay writer Murai returns to co-write the narrative. During the Perfect Blue scripting phase, Kon was deeply involved, proposing a lot of the ideas throughout, despite being uncredited. In Actress, it was a collaborative experience over 6 months. So it's not like he wrote this part and I wrote that part. To me, the most important process of filmmaking is the screenwriting, so while I was writing the script, I tackled the tough issues, such as dealing with different time tense. With the narrative they were tackling, it needed to come together as they jumped from period to period. Only by the combination of both the interviewer and the actress's perspective do we get a fuller picture of the events, which were based loosely on the lives of famous Japanese actresses, as a love letter to the nation's film history, including all manner of references. Maybe something stands out, Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, Yosujiro Osu's films. Maybe there are scenes which may look like Osu films, although not like any particular title. I tried to recreate what I have seen and what a typical Japanese film would look like. Yet if there's one movie that left a definitive impact on Millennium Actress, it's his favourite movie, Slaughterhouse-5.
I saw the George Roy Hill directed movie before I read the novel, and I was very impressed. How in the movie, different places and times would be put together and expressed at the same time as we follow the protagonist. I have read the original novel itself, but it was the movie that left an impression on me and has had a huge influence on my work. It defines Millennium Actress's style of cutting through time and space, seen to a lesser extent in Perfect Blue. In every frame of Pating's video, he describes Slaughterhouse's use of 3 styles of transition: match cuts, graphic match, intercutting between 2 time periods that mirror each other, a favourite of Kon's. He expanded on this, turning it into his own style of filmmaking. This technique also helped the frame count. Since we're dealing with a tight 32,000 for 92 minutes, they can slice off the in-between sequences, removing the filler or establishing shots as we glide through scene to scene. Moreover, Millennium Actress was Kon's last traditionally animated movie. It is impressive in its variety of colour palettes. A muted palette can flip to vividness just to reflect the intensity of that scene's memory.
I can't thank you enough, Chiyoko. But I had a feeling you might say yes.
The movie is considered the other side of the coin to Perfect Blue. They're like sisters, both dealing with the concept of fame, where Millennium Actress is optimistic in comparison to Perfect Blue's darkness. That optimism spreads into Kon's filmmaking. I find joy in the entire filmmaking process. I really enjoy every single moment along the way, from assembling the script to beginning establishing the worldview, then onto the character designs and art setting, the storyboarding, and collaboration work with lots of staff for the actual drawing and background art. Whatever the output, be it a sentence, a picture, or a sound, concreting the idea together is someone who is, after all, nothing but an anime fan. Against Kon's prior judgments, he was a collaborator at heart, who loved the work he did. This was his favourite scene. One that let music and imagery stand by their own. Susumu Hirasawa composed the soundtrack. Hirasawa's anime music became iconic in series like Berserk. His off-kilter electronics could be anxious or inspiring, depending on the situation. Kon, being a longtime fan, gave him a lot of leeway, a sort of leeway to him that you don't see in anime, using music roughs during the storyboard and timing phase. When Kon spoke to me about my music, he'd say things such as, what he liked about the music was the sense I had smuggled a capsule of science into the spiritual worldview. That's not to say that I was attempting to interpret the scientific world with a spiritual lens. In deciphering the universe, there are 2 contexts, scientific and spiritual, and I believe that Kon's perspective was that both were necessary to achieve balance. I was introduced to Kon over a decade ago in an interview that we both happened to attend. He was clearly a different sort from the typical music industry types, or even your average Joe. He had a strong presence, yet was modest. People who can maintain that sort of attitude in the industry hold similar values to myself, and, in my experience, are trustworthy. He liked my music very much. I personally was not a fan of manga or anime, so I thought it would be difficult to find shared points of interest. Yet from the moment we met, we both felt like we had old shared interests, as we each had the impression that we were similar people working in separate fields. They formed a friendship while continuing to work together. Hirasawa became a solid part of the foundation of Kon's movies. DreamWorks distributed Millennium Actress in the United States, but kind of dropped the ball after Spirited Away didn't perform in American theatres. They also changed the cover art for the worse. The DVD jacket, as Kon put it, what the hell? It was shown almost exclusively in New York and Los Angeles and received minimal advertising from its distributor.
Everybody who's seen it, every review I've read, has been how surprised they were, how emotional the film made them. It's emotional. How they were completely mesmerized by it. As the movie started, it starts off very slowly, and you're kind of going, what is this? And then suddenly you're in it.
Despite the lack of commercial success, Millennium Actress gathered critical acclaim, especially from animation historian Fred Patton, claiming it to be one of his favourite animated movies. And also it won many awards, including the prestigious Ofuji Noburo Award. When asked about the award, Kon stated, "It's not like I'm creating animation because I want to win awards. For the staff who work so hard on the films, it represents praise for them. Even if I stand in front of the staff and say, it did really well in the United States, putting the experience of seeing that reaction into words is difficult. So if I get a plaque or a trophy and bring that home, everyone gets excited." That movie had an ambitious topic that wouldn't be easy to sell. Despite being similar to a film like Titanic, it's all about how it used its unique style for displaying the life of an aging actress. its successes led to a movie that could compete with giants of the industry. And that's only thanks to the team that Kon assembled. He'd been networking animators since Rojin-C. So while much of the Perfect Blue team returned, in the end the results were like synergy, which money cannot buy. So even someone else with a big budget couldn't do what we did. Millennium Actress owes a lot to our teamwork. While Kon garnered critical acclaim, producer Murayama wanted him to have a hit, with something that could appeal to the mainstream, a comedy. Kon agreed. After all, he didn't want to tackle the same thing over and over again. Things can get redundant.
You're the one that found me.
Yes, ma'am.
Will you save my baby?
Yes, ma'am. I'll save him.
The origins were based loosely on John Ford's film, Three Godfathers. In this case, it's those at the bottom rung of society who are thrown into misadventure. Screenwriter Nobumoto returns, whose prior work on World Apartment Horror covered the same inequalities. Such topics are rare in anime. These are people who have been discarded from society, the homeless, the runaway girl. In Japanese society, civil rights that the people have are few in number. I wanted to examine how someone separated from the mainstream society could once again rejuvenate society. The story took 4 months for both Kon and Nobumoto to piece together. It's written specifically with coincidence and convenience that accelerate the conflict, following the grounded to fantasy foundation that the director is known for. If anything, this project feels more like an urban fairy tale than the rest. With Tokyo Godfather, we intentionally made the story simple and focused on exposing the background of the characters more. Although Tokyo Godfather is a comedy first, the marriage of its humor and tragedy are constantly battling, accentuated by the expressive facial reactions. Snappy, rubbery, willing to be cartoonish, they give the movie a lot of personality. This time with a higher frame count, it gives them extra options. Kon recorded reference for a fair few of the characters to give the animator something to work with. Murayama also got involved, to be a fly on the wall during those sessions, eh? So there's a basis to all the exaggeration. Kon would go out of his way to make sure that he had the right source material for the production. Fundamentally, they wanted to think of anime as film, which meant a lot of detail and thinking of the characters as actors. With 3 characters the focus this time, they're still majority women, which gets you to wonder, what is Kon's preference? As he said himself, with a male character I can see the bad aspects because I am a man. I know very well what a male character is thinking. Even if he's supposed to be very cool, I can see the bad side of him. That makes it very difficult to create a male character. On the other side, if you write a female protagonist, because it's the opposite sex and I don't know them the way I know a male, I can project my obsessions onto the character and expand the aspects I want to describe. Until I made Perfect Blue, I didn't describe female characters that much, especially in manga. Once I did, I found it very easy to write them. Miyuki in particular seems to be inspired by the kind of girls that he grew up with during high school, the ones he looked up to.
自分が例えば16歳の男の子だった時に比べて周りのやっぱり同じ年の女の子っていうのはね、もうちょっと抱えてるものが複雑だったりとかね、大人びたところがあったりしますよね。なんでそういうところで想像をたくましくして。こうであろうというのとこうであってほしいっていうところを、願望もありつつ、願望の方が大きい。
She does go against the grain of the typical anime girl, choosing that lower vocal tone and abrasive personality. Same for Hana, who is someone who feels that she was born in the wrong body, and who used to work in a hostess club as a drag queen, but now falls into homelessness. For more information on the background of this, you can find it in Gil Lies Here's video. But she embraces the extremes of camp and wears her heart on her sleeve, making a very likeable character. Nobumoto's input was an essential part, especially in the case of Hana. It was only possible for them to write a character that they described as deep and rich, by having both of them together to bring a more nuanced perspective. At first glance, it would have been possible to make Hana a negative stereotype if the character didn't have so much humanity.
All that yodeling is going to do is make you hungrier.
Jin, Miyuki, and Hana fall to the backdrop of the Neon Capital. Tokyo plays a pivotal role in Kon's prior movies, but none so much to be named after it. And Tokyo Godfathers is not something you would see in a guidebook or something in current fashion. I don't actually have much interest in terms of the newest fashion or something in the Tokyo guidebook, but rather I'm interested in the back streets, and that's how it was depicted. When these characters have to eat, they have to go to the garbage piles to eat, and in that scene you can actually see the actual unusual Tokyo, like taking a peek through a back street. Much of the city was digitally rendered from these scouting photos, and it captures both the cold and warmth of the big city, and making the scenery more dense with world building. The music is a key component to its atmosphere. Hirasawa doesn't return, but in place is Keiichi Suzuki and his band. Most well known for their fantastic work in the Earthbound and Mother series, that eccentric style of musicianship with a variety of genres mashed in sets that tongue-in-cheek tone for the movie. They even get to reference Kubrick as they rework the Ninth Symphony by Bach into a synth reggae cluster. The film wasn't a smash hit, perhaps it's too idiosyncratic for its own good. How was the response? Well, Murayama says it was mixed at the time. Some liked it, but others didn't go down well with. Which saddened Murayama, though he was glad that they made the film. But it didn't seem to faze Kon, especially since American audiences did seem to be more positive towards it. But when talking about critical reaction, he took it with a pinch of salt. That's because my self-criticism is much more harsh. That puts a far greater pressure on me. Favourable judgment and praise from people for this and that are only natural responses, since the making of a work has to be interesting for myself in the first place. I don't want to ignore fans' opinions, but I wouldn't go out and ask them. The movie garnered its own cult following, leading to its re-release this year with a new dub, which is pretty good. So not everyone can enjoy the wholesomeness next to its edge of violence, but did definitely prey on the fear of youth violence of the time, something that Paranoia Agent takes full advantage of. At the beginning of the millennium, a baseball-wielding youth committed 8 assaults before capture. In the years to follow, a spike of juvenile crime hit Japan. Paranoia Agent is a show about modern living and the fears surrounding that. After several movies, there were some ideas that were not included into them. Over time, these ideas accumulated. Not that I dropped them because they weren't good enough, but they just didn't fit into any of the projects. It hurt to see the material go to waste, so I looked for a chance to recycle it. Production began while Tokyo Godfathers was still being made, as to not lose the talent gathered for the film. After all, Madhouse animated the show completely in-house, without outsourcing. If on a film, budget, time and gathering staff are the most difficult parts, a show is a completely different story. Instead of only 90 minutes, they were dealing with over 4 hours of content on a weekly schedule. For Tokyo Godfather, 30 million yen was given for 10 minutes of screen time. On a Paranoia Agent, they had to use 4 times as much screen time before getting the same budget. The woes of that production started to overtake as it went. There was a sense of being cornered and looking for escape, which could also be said of the characters within the show as they struggled against their own fate, dealing with a battle between a constructed identity and their true selves. The escapism they fall into can only last so long. Their actual production became a meta point in one episode, which originally planned to feature live-action sequences involving the animation team, but was ultimately not viable in the end. Each episode differed, a continuous story segmented into 13 volumes. I'm going to create those as if I was making 13 different types of work. Protagonists change, and with them, the mood. The secondary characters of Volume 2 become the central figures of Volume 3. The supporting part there turns into the Volume 4 protagonist, and so on. This kind of relay system is one of the ideas I've always wanted to try. There's a level of reverse cause and effect to keep the mystery open, holding on to aftermaths that don't make sense until the next scene or episode, like a cryptic puzzle with a few parts missing. These episodes live and die in the 20 minutes they're given, including the protagonist they follow. While Kon didn't have much control over the entire production, only storyboarding a couple episodes, his fingerprints are still all over. Elements of his other projects do return, including Hirasawa's score, which solidified its unnerving dreamscape atmosphere. Especially seen in like the OP, where they use a form of yodeling, which is definitely new. But the stark imagery contrasts with the mood of the track, Dream Island, Obsessional Park. Ethereal in nature because the show itself had a very late time slot. After all, a vivid title screen would wake people up and you couldn't have that. The sense of playfulness at the end of the world is definitely something that you could see throughout each episode. However, I would say the ED leaves its own kind of impact, in a sleepy, creepy atmosphere that gets you to ruminate after each episode, to think about what happened. on the precipice of calm, knowing that something dire could be around the corner, the cast dozing off on a mellow field as they fragment, cross-fading from figure to figure. This serenity won't last. The sound design here became a vital part of the show, which is usually underutilized in these kind of high deadline situations. Kon mixed all 13 episodes, each with their own motif relating to the episode, if it is the beeping of the answering phone in Double Lips, or Part 5's retro computer game fanfare for the episode The Holy Warrior. Seishi Minagami became the main writer on the show, who needed to take the seeds of Satoshi's mind and turn them into something. My ideas come from ordinary day-to-day living, such as watching movies, reading books, listening to music, and talking with my friends. I get ideas that are linked to trends around the world, but I just take in the information from TV, newspapers, and the internet in a normal way. However, I feel the easiest moments to extract an idea is when I'm talking with someone. When I'm talking with someone, I feel like my mind opens in some ways. A few episodes do have real-world events that parallel them, if it be the Japanese spike in net suicides, a woman living an office job by day, escort by night, whose life went horribly wrong, kawaii culture. Moromi bears a similarity to Sanrio's mascot, Hello Kitty. The idea of an idolized childhood is reflected in such mascots, which here is not the case. There is a darkness hiding under it all.
Welcome to Twin Peaks. My name is Margaret Lanterman. I live in Twin Peaks. I am known as the Log Lady.
Paranoia is shown after midnight on WOWOW, who also broadcast Twin Peaks in Japan, which garnered a cult following. The show follows that supernatural mystery angle with a wide cast living in one city, though with Paranoia Agent we don't get the Cooper-style character until much later on. Instead of a killer, we have Paranoia's shonen bat, a fantastical figure, not explained, like a form of a modern folklore, where myths spread through telephone poles and Ethernet cables, growing stronger with every embellishment. That merging point between these worlds, a dream that comes true, just like in Paprika.
実はね、多分パーフェクトブルーとか千年女優とかっていうのは、おそらくパプリカみたいなことをやりたいっていうのが先にあったはずなんですよね。その作品の順番っていう。パプリカが出た当時に読んでるんで、そういうなんか夢と現実が曖昧になっていく感じっていうのが先にやっぱやりたいっていうのが。
This was a chance to work with another one of Kon's inspirations, Tsutsui. It had to be destiny, Kon said. It was thanks to Mr. Tsutsui encouragement that we decided to make Paprika. The author gave Kon complete control to do whatever he wanted, as adapting it page by page would have been pretty dull. For the process, storyboards became a huge focus, and Kon was already interested in such things as an ex-mangaka, especially on Paprika where it's such a mind-bending fantasy. He spent extra time developing the process, which he took great joy in.
今までコンテ作りはシナリオの構成を決めた後に行っていたが、夢の映像化を実現させるために今回はこの方法を取ったという。しかし重要なクライマックスのシナリオが完成していない状況でコンテを書き進めて大丈夫なのだろうか。
Among these fun-filled processes, I prefer doing the storyboards. When I'm doing this, I really feel like I'm making the movie, even if they're the still images. The story is visualized by connecting pictures, so it's like letting the actors act, shoot them, and edit them all on paper. Everything about my filmmaking process is on the storyboard. I originally was a manga artist, so therefore controlling the storyboard is really easy for me, since the style of storyboarding is like doing comics. Every detail, every transition, the edits, his stylistic persona comes out in full force. Since Gon has had enough time to refine his filmmaking style, he lets his inner hoodlum free. To create this rollercoaster narrative, you don't need to understand everything to enjoy the experience. Of course, the interaction of reality and dreams is a motif that I still have interest in, and I keep bringing it back into my work. I think the way in which I've handled this, along with my workmanship skills, have gotten better and better after using this motif several times. Yet there is a straightforward story alongside it. Kon tackles the otaku narrative. As Andrew Osmond says in The Illusionist, Kon's prior projects haven't painted the obsessive otaku in the best light, but I think it comes full circle in Paprika. with the director stating, if you were to define the otaku as a person who pursues something that they love very much, that really is a positive thing. People who have said that, Satoshi Kon is someone who's very critical of otaku. But I think the only problem is that otaku lifestyles tends to produce people who can't achieve a balance in their life and don't have proper relationships with society at large. With the character Dr. Tokita, who is possibly the smartest man in the world, but he also acts like a complete child. He's the embodiment of the otaku outlook. He also happens to be played by Amaru Rei's original voice actor, Toru Furuya, pulling Kon back into his own otaku days. And then, instead of falling to the negative fate seen in past characters, ultimately, Tokita finds a balance and puts other people first. And with his relationship with Dr. Chiba, they become better people overall. Returning to Kon's, you have to face reality rather than hiding from it. Be true to yourself. Also, it would be a bit hard for him to genuinely hate otaku considering they make up such a large part of the workforce. In his own words, I represent the film and the staff of 100 or 200 people behind it. I'm not the sole author of the films I make. The number of animated productions is increasing and there's not enough staff to go around. As a director, he valued the staff he could get. When animator Takahiko Habiru was asked about the experience of working with Kon, he said, "They had some of the best animators in Japan all under one roof, working on that movie, so just having a chance to be there was an incredibly valuable experience. Being able to talk to Satoshi Kon in person was particularly important to me. Having everybody all in one place like that is the kind of thing that was only achievable at Madhouse." Satoshi Kon was the kind of person who took care of the people who worked for him. He took them out to eat. He'd go over and talk to the people at their desks, in person whenever possible. Paprika is the cultivation of all of Kon's prior connections and themes. Hirasawa gives what might be one of his best soundtracks, which closes off the narrative, letting Kon bring these dreams into reality concept bigger than ever before, and plays with the source material that he loves. Not to mention, there is some celebration to the American films that gave Kon aspirations to make so much stuff, creatively to begin with. I was brought up during a period of rapid economic development in Japan. After the war and the United States occupied Japan for a time, many Japanese people were dreaming about a Japan that was as plentiful as United States. Many people seemed to work very hard in order to make a country that would be as rich as the United States. Naturally, many of us looked at Hollywood movies. Paprika seems to be like the mirror version of Paranoia Agent, but you have very similar teams, and the elements run in the same way, especially towards the ending when it comes to things like folklore or explosive finales. Although you can see how Paprika comes together with a more optimistic tone overall, like waking up from an eerie dream in the comfort of your own home. I've made a lot of films surrounding dreams and reality, but now I've finished Paprika, I'd like to move on to something else. My plan is to do animation for children. Given that I plan to direct them, they certainly won't be children's films that I'd call normal. I'd like these films to be seen by both children and the adults that accompany them. Paprika premiered at Venice Film Festival. Alongside Otomo, years after they first met, they stand together, both on the same level as directors. Although Kon's next project would move away from the Otomo-style realism of his prior work, with Fleischer-style robots on a road trip named after the song Dream Machine by Hirasawa himself. Kon wanted to use a lot of music from the album in particular. This change towards family animation could have turned into a breakout for Kon, grasping a new audience, or keeping the humanity of his work. During that period, those were the animations that did the best in Japan, so after his Ohio short, he went into a new chapter in his career. How could I forget May 18th of this year, I received the following pronouncement from a cardiovascular doctor. It's the latter stages of pancreatic cancer. You have at most half a year left to live. It was fate so unexpected and untenable that the two of us together could barely take it. I used to honestly think that I can't help it if I die any day. Still, it was so sudden. It was as if death had positioned itself right behind me. Before I knew it, there was nothing I could do. The illness kept progressing day by day. I also attempted to do all the things necessary to be ready to die properly. To ensure that my wife should take over any modest assets that I had smoothly by writing a will. And besides, I wanted to remove any anxieties from myself, the one who had to take a little hop over. I can die at last. Even if I had to be hospitalized and undergo many examinations. The results of those examinations, pneumonia, and when I asked the doctor, the answer I received was very businesslike. You may last 1 or 2 days. Even if you survive this, you'll probably have until the end of the month. That was July the 7th. It was a rather brutal Tanabata, for sure. So I decided right there and then I wanted to die at home. Thanks to my wife's efforts, the hospital's cooperation, and the coincidences that were so numerous, they only seemed to be gifts from the heavens. I've never seen so many coincidences and events falling into place so neatly in my life. I could barely believe it. This wasn't Tokyo Godfathers after all. I was lonely, but this is what I was thinking. Maybe dying won't be so bad. I didn't have any reason for it. Perhaps I needed to think like that, but I was surprisingly calm and relaxed. However, there was just one thought that was gnawing away at me. I don't want to die here. As I thought that, something moved out from the calendar on the wall and started to spread around the room. Oh dear, my hallucinations aren't all that original. I had to smile at the fact that my professional instincts were working even at times like this. But in any case, I really felt death very close to me. I was a little surprised that when I was being carried into the living room, as a bonus, I experienced that deathbed experience everyone is familiar with. However, it seems that I was able to overcome pneumonia. I did think like this in a way. I didn't manage to die. Amazingly, after then, my life force was rejuvenated from the bottom of my heart. I couldn't waste my time and that I had to spend it carefully, so I thought that I wanted to erase at least one of the irresponsibilities that I'd left behind in this world. To be truthful, I'd only told the people closest to me about the cancer. I hadn't even told my parents. There were so many people I wanted to see before I died, to say even one word of greeting to, family and relatives, old friends with whom I'd shared good and bad times, the countless people I'd been able to know because of my position as a film director. What irony, I was prone on my deathbed and I didn't want people to see my emaciated body. I wanted most of the people I knew to remember me as I was, the Satoshi that was full of life. Please understand that this was Satoshi Kon's selfish desire. I love the world I lived in. Just the fact that I can think that makes me very happy. However, even though I can let go of my many irresponsible actions, I cannot help regretting two things about my parents and about Madhouse's founder, Murayama-san. Even though it was rather late, there was no choice but to come clean to the whole truth. I wanted to beg them for forgiveness. As soon as I saw Murayama-san's face when he came to see me at my home, I couldn't stop the flow of tears from my feelings of shame. I'm so sorry for ending like this. Murayama-san said nothing. He shook his head and he gripped both my hands. I was filled with thankfulness. A feeling of gratitude and joy that I'd been lucky enough to work with this person came over me like a landslide. I felt as though I'd been forgiven in that instant. My biggest regret is the film Dreaming Machine. I worried not only about the film itself, but about the staff with whom I was able to work with. After all, there's a strong possibility that my storyboards that were created with blood, sweat and tears will never be seen. This is because Satoshi Kon put his arms around the original story, the script, characters, the setting, the sketches, the music, every single image. Basically, most of the work can only be understood by Satoshi Kon. It's easy to say that it was my fault for arranging things this way, but from my point of view, I made every effort to share my vision with others. However, in my current state, I can only feel deep remorse for my inadequacies in these areas. I'm really sorry to all the staff. However, I wanted them to understand, if only a little bit, Satoshi Kon was that kind of guy, and that's why he was able to make a rather weird anime that were a bit different. When I told Murayama-san about my concerns about Dreaming Machine, he just said, "Don't worry, we'll figure something out, so don't worry." I wept uncontrollably. Even with my precious movies, I'd been so irresponsible with the production, the budget, but I'd always had Murayama-san to figure it out. And for me, in the end, this time is no different. I really haven't changed. I was able to talk to my heart's content with Murayama-san. Thanks to this, I was able to feel at least a little bit that Satoshi Kon's talents and skills were of some value in our industry. I'm grateful for those at the bottom of my heart that Murayama-san gave me the opportunity to show the world these things. Thank you so very much. Satoshi Kon was happy as an animation director. It was so heartbreaking to tell my parents. I'd really intended to go up to Sapporo, where my parents live, but the illness progressed so unexpectedly and annoyingly fast I ended up calling them on the telephone from a hospital bed as I was closest to death. I'm in the late stages of cancer and I will die soon. I was so happy being born as a child to you, father and mother. Thank you. They must have been devastated to hear this out of the blue, but I was certain I was going to die right then. But I wanted to see my parents' faces one last time. My parents followed my selfish wishes and came the next day. I can never forget the first words out of my mother's mouth when she saw me lying there. "I'm so sorry for not bringing you into this world with a stronger body." I was completely speechless. It's so disrespectful to die before one's parents. But in the last 10 plus years, I've been able to do what I want as an anime director, achieve my goals, and get some good reviews. I do regret that my films didn't make a lot of money, but I think they got what they deserved. In the last 10 plus years, in particular, I felt as though I've lived more intensely than other people. Lastly, to my wife, about whom I worry the most, but to who has been the most support until the end. Since that time left pronouncement, we drowned ourselves in tears together so many times. Every day was brutal for both of us, physically and mentally. There are almost no words for it. But the reason why I was able to survive those difficult days was because of the words that you said to me right after we received the news. I'll be at your side until the end. My wife is awesome, but you stood close to me. You always understood that I needed to immerse myself in my work, that my talent was there. I was happy, truly happy during my life. And as I wait for death, I just can't express my gratitude to you enough. So to everyone who's stuck with me, thank you. With my heart full of gratitude for everything good in the world, I'll put down my pen. Now excuse me, I have to go. Satoshi Kon passed away on August 24th at 6:20 a.m. He was 46. It was a great loss to the industry. Moriyama said that he'd dedicate the rest of his life to finishing the film, and a third of it was complete. But what is it to finish another man's work? Does it become yours? Kon felt that there was only one person that could finish it, and that was himself. And Moriyama eventually came to the same conclusion after about 4 or 5 years. He said something along the lines that, while there are great film directors out there, if they finish it, it no longer becomes what Kon's vision would be. It would be better off I just recreate it from scratch using Kon's original idea. Although after all this time he hasn't found anyone that comes up to the standards that he's looking for, and time is looking thin. Really, in the end of the day, what I'd like to see is maybe like a documentary on the making of the film and perhaps even the archive of what they have to show. Since so much of it was already done, it would be a shame to let it all go to waste. And it seems like they've already got that sort of idea because a film has been announced just as I'm recording this. Ultimately, Satoshi Kon's legacy is not one that would be forgotten for a long time. I'd also like to thank Andrew Osmond for helping me out on this project. He's the writer behind the book The Illusionist, which is probably the best resource for what happened in Kon's life that you're going to find in the West, although it's been out of print for a long time. And those libraries are shut down, so I'm very much appreciative of what he was able to do there. Also, he has his own article on basically the legacy of Kon that he's released very recently, which I will link on the screen and in the description if you want to check it out. Projects like these really only happen with the support of people on my Patreon and other people who want to support the channel. I'm going to become a full-time internet boy from now on, so any support that you can give is much appreciated. And if not, a share, a like, goes a long way. Anyway, I've got to thank those patrons: Joven, Daniel Strait, Alex Murati, that Puerto Rican guy, all that helped this project get to where it was. And I'm probably going to start streaming on a regular basis when I get a new setup sorted, Wednesdays and Sundays, just to do updates on what I'm doing, perhaps show some stuff from behind the scenes, researching, etc, etc, we'll see. Oh yeah, and I'll probably have a Teespring or something, I don't know, I'll put down all my links to stuff in the description. So, thank you very much. And I'll see you next time. You know, Kat, we're trying to be very serious right now, and you're kind of harshing my vibe. Of course. You done? No, you're not done.